You're listening to Don't Waste Water.
And the only thing I was looking for was like, you got rocks in your head, this thing is stupid. And I didn't get that. I got, oh, well, this is really interesting. And this is an alternative approach to Monte Carlo simulations and a number of other things. So I thought, okay, since I don't know what I'm talking about in this area just yet, and I didn't get these big negatives, this looks like a pretty good idea.
Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast.
People are making claims like, oh, we can predict when your assets are going to fail. Well, based on what? You can't do that out of the box unless you've trained the models on that customer's assets for a good amount of time.
I'm your host, Antoine Walter, and in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Tacoma Zach as my guest.
The legacy software firms, they have lots and lots of resources. One of the constraints is, and I've worked for very big companies before, is that decisions don't get made quickly and things don't, generally speaking, move quickly. So how do they do things? They go and buy technology and try to integrate it. And the emphasis is on the word try.
Tacoma is the CEO and co-founder of MentorAPM.
You have to understand what your asset portfolio is. You have to understand what your condition of those assets are, or you'll never get any money from the government for the state revolving funds to go and deal with your infrastructure.
MentorAPM transforms aging infrastructure into reliable operations through intelligent asset performance management.
Eventually, things do get commoditized, and nobody can expect to stay, oh, it's just going to be this way for the next 50 years. If you do that, you're probably going to be out of business in 20.
And before we start, let me thank my sponsors, Simple Lab and Bluefoot Membranes.
When I got the phone call afterwards, my hands were shaking. I called my wife up and said, you will not believe what just happened.
No, the water industry is not an island, and that probably explains why we've seen an unprecedented wave of AI marketing claims around water tech. And without being the party pooper here, I believe this deserves careful scrutiny. I'm sorry to pick on them, but they're the latest, so here we go. Emerson announced this July their Ovation AI-enabled virtual advisor, marketed as the first generative artificial intelligence advisor integrated into an automation system specifically designed for the power and water industries. And while genuine AI applications offer real value in water operations, this kind of press release stunt also highlights the widening gap between marketing promises and technical realities. Over the past months, you may have heard of Xylem's AI tools that detect and stop leaks and their breakthrough technologies, or of Veolia's claims to take artificial intelligence deployment to the next level using the most advanced AI technologies, or of Siemens' promises to find 9 out of 10 blockages with AI that's automatically trained and implemented with sensor data from day of installation, or of Schneider Electric's AI-driven water management approaches that allegedly predict potential events up to 5 days in the future. These vendors, and many more, consistently use superlative language: breakthrough, revolutionary, word first, and don't get me wrong, I'm not even implying that they don't do what they claim. I'm just saying that there often is minimal technical details about actual AI capabilities, accuracy rates, or deployment challenges. And I would think that even from a marketing perspective, that's not a clever move. Black boxes don't sell in water endeavors. So that's why I believe that this week's conversation paints an interesting and timely picture. For instance, when Tacoma shares how most utilities need 6 to 12 months of data gathering just to establish baseline equipment behavior, with reliable prediction systems typically taking 1 to 2 years from project kickoff. Marketing materials may promise 99% accuracy out of the box, but how realistic is that? How believable is it? Anyone that's ever dealt with real-world data from real-world water systems knows that the basis is not that strong, and you'll have to up your sleeves and produce the right data streams for yourself and bring tailored knowledge to the pot. And if you wonder why that even matters, think of this. 2 years ago, 1/4 of the large US water utilities had tested AI. It's not me making up a number, it's the result of a survey by the American Society of Civil Engineers. 1/4 in 2023! That's a lot! But if you've ever tried to make utilities adopt something new, you also know that if they had one bad experience 10 or 15 years ago, they'll remember. And they'll tell you, we've tried it and it doesn't work. So we'd better be careful with our inflated claims today if we don't want them to backfire when they're true down the line. Water and water systems are complex and dynamic things that are fluid and ever-changing. That's also what makes them fascinating, right? And we haven't always been, as a sector, very good at documenting this. to use a euphemism. That's how many systems are data-rich, information-poor, with sensors that are less smart than claimed, historical data that's often skimpy, inconsistent, or unusable. I believe Tacoma puts it best when he says that if you put rubbish into the smart system, you will only ever get rubbish out. Yet when we come up with shiny marketing claims, we don't really address these foundational data requirements.
So you're a hater.
Am I, the guy who explained you in last week's newsletter how AI can help your water sales process, going to preach cutting short on AI claims? Certainly not. I'm a power user of AI, and I believe it will play a prominent role in the future of water tech and water operation. But there's a critical distinction between AI as a productivity tool that plugs onto your existing processes and enhances them, and AI as a magical black box that washes everything whiter than white in the future. Let's take the example of my podcast alumni, Vapor. I'm linking you my conversation with Amanda Sikera in the show notes if you missed that one. Their AI system processes millions of meters of pipe inspection footage annually, detecting defects with 90% accuracy while reducing weeks of manual analysis to minutes. But the AI application in this is not magic, it's an automation of tedious tasks with humans keeping decision-making roles. It will do wonders if the input data is good. It won't do much if you feed it with crap. Pardon my French, or generic and universal truths that doesn't exist in the water realm. So if there's one thing I want you to take out of this introduction, it's the following. Shut down your fear of missing out. You're not missing out if you don't embark on the AI wave just now. You need to learn to walk before you run. Yes, there is AI in the water future and in your own future, but start by building the foundations for that AI to be helpful. Ensure you collect the right data and you understand your systems. Tacoma speaks of vision and mission in today's conversation. That's exactly what I mean here, and not only to be fancy and to tell you to start with why. I have a colleague at GF that always uses that picture in all his presentations. Two guys working in the field with a plow pulled by a horse, except that the plow has square wheels. Another guy comes by and offers them to switch those for round wheels, but they decline because they're too busy. What the inflated AI claims make me feel right now is that we're trying to switch the horse for a rocket. And while that might be a great idea long term, we may first listen to the guy who tells us we'd already be well off with round wheels. First principle first, Tacoma will explain that much better, so let me leave him the floor. Right before that, as always, remember you can take this episode and share it with a colleague, a friend, your boss, or your team. That's the only way this podcast keeps growing, so I'm very thankful for your help, and I'll meet you on the other side. Hi, Tacoma. Welcome to the show.
Antoine, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
A long while ago, people believed that I was like a digital freak and that I really knew all the ins and outs of everything which is app-based. And the truth is, I just have questions, so hopefully you have answers. But I'm super glad that we're back to that topic of the digitization of our sector and the clever aspect of that. My first question has something to do with the logo behind you, actually, because there's asset management and there's asset performance management. What is the number one thing between those two concepts which has to be solved in the water sector?
Excellent question. There's actually a lot of confusion around that, and people tend to throw both terms around and other terms as well synonymously. Asset management actually has a definition on the ISO committee. Asset management is defined as a coordinated activity of the various functions within an organization. As an example, that would be purchasing and engineering and operations and safety, including finance, in order to extract maximum value from their assets. Whereas asset performance management is really sort of a tactical or strategic elements about how to actually manage a particular asset or group of assets. Asset management is a large, overarching, corporate-wide program, whereas managing assets is a much more tactical, specific activity.
Where's the biggest gap?
I think a big gap with asset management is a lack of understanding of the gap in like, what is the real value? Why would I want to do this sort of thing? It sounds like it's a very heavy program and I got to do a lot of check the boxes, but is there really something for me at the end of the day? It's like, if I maintain this or not maintain this, I really can't tell the difference because we're talking about two different realities that you go down. You can't get back on the train and try the other way. But there has been a lot of evidence now to suggest that there is a significant benefit, for the most part, in implementing a considered asset management program. Asset performance management, we have a lot of tools and a lot of really good technology. The kicker for me is always, why are we putting these tools on there? Is this asset really worth it? Is the expense and the time and the effort really going to deliver a return on investment? Because this asset is so important, it can never go down unexpectedly. Or is this something that actually could run to failure? In both cases, it's an aspect of disciplined thinking and organizing the efforts. We bring the discipline of business thinking to the physical asset world. Businesses always tend to sort of have a very much, here's our mission, here's our charter, here's the values of the corporation, and every decision we make must be in support of that. And we just won't spend any money on something that doesn't support that. We don't tend to be that way with the assets. A lot of times it's this scattershot, shotgun approach, like everything is important. Well, if everything is important, then nothing is important, right? So the idea there is, I don't know that we, at least in the work environment, apply enough discipline to sharpen our focus.
If we're specific, you wrote an article, which I read in preparation for that conversation, which was eye-opening for me, because you write an article saying that some valves should be run to failure. And I'm like, that makes no sense. But then you think of it, you say, yeah, actually, it makes full sense, because that's the best way to run some part of the asset. Some specific subpart of your systems should be run to failure.
Absolutely. And I can't take any credit for that insight. That's a fundamental tenet or principle of RCM, Reliability Center Maintenance, which is the foundation why the airplanes stay in the air. The seminal work of Nolan and Heap back in the 50s and 60s helped understand how things fail and why the airplanes were crashing. They came up with this wonderful set of insights that keep things flying and safe. But there was a fundamental corollary that comes out from that, and that some things are absolutely critical and essential, and they can never go down unexpectedly. But there are definitely some that it's like, okay, it's nice to have, but let it run to failure. Don't waste your time on it. We actually used to think about it when we were running the business at Veolia. It's like, oh gosh, if we actually literally ignored the assets that were at the 50 percentile mark in terms of criticality and less, we honestly thought that if we applied effort only at the top 50%, we'd have better outcomes. And we ended up finding that we had a 20% improvement in our maintenance spend. We had fewer NOVs, better outcomes, much smoother operations, and a very targeted capital spend. The results spoke for themselves. And RCM says it. Some assets are worth running to failure. Let them run to failure. They're not that important.
But that means that you need to understand very accurately what you're managing. Because if you have a wide class with lots of points on the map, and you don't know exactly what those points are and how they behave, then you have no ways of classifying what is critical and what is not.
You're absolutely right. What's fundamentally built into the software, and what we always recommend our customers is like, look, you need to very clearly articulate your mission. They usually have that. It's in some sort of charter, the reasons why the assets were allowed to be built in the first place, particularly if you're looking at, say, a municipal or government agency. And then there's the values of the corporation or the organization, and there is the mission. Like, why do these assets even exist? Well, our business is to make water that's potable and nobody ever gets sick. Or if it's wastewater, we'll always treat wastewater. We'll never not take wastewater, and we will always treat it to a particular level. When you look at that and you say, okay, well, this is what the assets are there for. Engineers love to design stuff. Every asset in a facility contributes to some extent or impacts to some extent those values and that mission. Not all assets are created equal. The interesting thing is that if you change the weight that you assign to safety versus cost of production, well, now all of a sudden you pay more attention to anything that could cause a safety issue, and those assets all of a sudden become more critical in terms of your overall mission statement than actually the costs associated with producing something. When you evaluate a facility, and there are ways to evaluate it very quickly that we developed when we were at Veolia, that was a spin-out of that became Uberlytics, and that is, when we evaluate these things, we can put them all in ranked order. And the stuff that's the most important, that when things go wrong, it really upsets the apple cart and it really hits us hard, those are the ones you should spend more attention on. The stuff that barely moves the needle, let it run to failure.
But that again means you have to understand exactly what stuff do. If you're S3, if you're SAP, then everything is an asset with a number and a spare part. And then you can't be like a specialist of a pump and a specialist of a library and a specialist of a bus stop. You need a trade-off. And the trade-off is that you won't know that if the return sludge pump doesn't work, well, your biological basin can't work.
Yeah.
That means you referred several times to your history with Veolia, that it was rooted in the fact that you came from Veolia. How important is it to have asset management tailored to water versus generalist approaches?
The principles are universally applicable. The idea that saying, I need to prioritize, I need to understand what my assets are there to do. I can break them down. And I can say, okay, it breaks down into areas, regions of the plant and systems. And eventually you get to the assets. And then that system asset realm is kind of where the magic sauce happens. And let's jump a step up and go to systems. If you look at a car, you've got like several thousand components and parts. You can break a car up into something more tangible, as an example, like the tires, the engine, the air conditioning system, et cetera. So when the customer breaks the facility down, they look and say, oh, okay, system A has a certain function and it's supposed to do something. And when it doesn't do this, it's a big deal. Right now, that return activated sludge system isn't doing its job. How much of an impact is that? So you do this evaluation on these systems. But that discipline of looking at it, breaking it down and saying, what is the impact when it doesn't do what it's supposed to do? And how does it affect all these things that I care about, my safety, my regulatory, all that sort of stuff? It's the same process, whether you're ExxonMobil or you are a local City of Phoenix kind of stuff. And the reason is that ExxonMobil might have a different business model and they would have a different breakout of systems. But the questions to ask and the disciplined approach is identical. What'll be a difference between the two is their business model is different. So whereas a municipality is very risk averse. They say, we will always take water. We will never not take water. We will always produce good water. We will never not produce good water. End of story. So therefore, we have a lot of redundancy and we're going to put a lot of assets against it because we cannot make people sick. Exxon, different story. Theirs is profit driven. And so they have much fewer assets. They can't go down. They monitor things like crazy. And they understand that probably 50 to 60% of their systems are really critical to their oil production because they don't want to spend excess money. Their business model is different, right? But the discipline and the types of questions are identical. It's just that the number of systems and assets that come out as critical is different between those two. And what they can do about it is also different.
Let's hear from my sponsor, Simple Lab. Testing water and everything around it should be simple. With Simple Lab, you choose what to test, from drinking water and wastewater to soil, air, food, and surfaces, and they handle the rest. Kits arrive at your door with free round-trip shipping, samples go to certified labs, and results come back fast, concise, and actionable. Trusted by leading brands and growing teams, Simple Lab offers hundreds of ways to better understand your environment. Get started today at gosimplelab.com. It's the first link in the description. Thanks Simple Lab for supporting my work. And back to me. Does it start with the mission or does it start with the budget? Because if the budget is unlimited, I just pour more money at it.
It always starts with the mission. And the reason is nobody has an unlimited budget. We're constantly having to do more with the same or less amount of resources. So it has to start with the mission. And you have to look at it and say, look, I got $100 of need and I got $10 to spend. Where am I going to spend it? So you have to prioritize and you have to understand. And there are a lot of ways to do an analysis poorly. And there are a few really good ways to do it where you're going to get an outcome that you can actually sign on the dotted line and say, I'm going to spend my money on this because I want this to work well. We actually do this quite often at home. When we do a 101 asset management 101 training for our customers, saying, look, the software has everything in it to support a meaningful asset management program for you. And when we break it out for them, we say, look, you guys do this every single day of the year. You all own a vehicle. Generally speaking, it's a pretty safe bet. And how we make decisions about how we maintain our vehicle, especially when we have children involved who are now all of a sudden going to take our car and go places, we become very sensitized to safety and a whole bunch of other kind of things. So we're naturally sensitized to I got to maintain it a certain way. Even though the radio doesn't work, I did let that run to failure. It's more important that my tires are good and that I've got an oil change. Otherwise, I'm not getting to work. These principles, they're really, really simple, actually, because we do them every single day. They just haven't been put in the context of very large infrastructure.
You mentioned how we have to do more with less. You also touched on the bad grades that the American infrastructure is getting. At least American infrastructure gets a grade. In many places, we don't dare to put a grade because we know it might be really wrong. And that grade is always bad, has always been for 20 plus years. And my question here is, can we do more with what we have? I mean, is there really that much inside? When I was operating wastewater treatment plants, it was absolutely clear to me that there is 20 to 30% energy optimization in the plant. And everybody agrees on that. Do we have this kind of buffer? And what is the potential between doing things just as they fly against well-constructed strategy?
The biggest gap right now is I think we still have a lot of low-hanging fruit. And part of the reason is that the degree of adoption is low. I think there's still a misconception about what asset management is. I mean, if you go to the conferences, it doesn't really matter who's talking. And you look at the papers that are published, and oftentimes you'll see things like, oh, well, we did a condition assessment thing, we're doing asset management. Or we did a rate study, or we did an asset inventory thing, and we're doing asset management. Well, no, you're not. What you are doing is you're doing selected pieces of the whole, and it's not a comprehensive thing. And the challenge is that, one, there's a misunderstanding of what it really is, because it's much more comprehensive and coordinated than what people think. Now, these are good things for them to do. They need to get done. But they make the mistake of thinking, oh, we're doing asset management. It's like saying, I'm filling up my tire in my car and therefore I'm driving. Well, no, you're just filling up a tire. So I think one is the low-hanging fruit. There's still way more adoption that's needed. There's still more education required. And I think a desire for utilities to adopt something like this. Part of the challenge is they're so busy reacting and they've got such a huge job in front of them. I think they're in such a reactive mode. They're too busy. I can't think of anything anymore. Therefore, I just need something to help me do my job today. And I think we get a lot of very cool tech being applied to current situations. But a lot of times when I think about it, it's like throwing a turbocharger on a 1975 Fiat and expecting that all of a sudden you're going to win Le Mans. Well, the rest of the car is kind of janky and old, and it needs attention as well. Yeah, you're going to go faster. I hope you don't crash. I love technology, but again, it needs this coordinated approach, and it needs to be a disciplined, thoughtful approach. A former colleague of mine at Veolia used to say, if you don't understand risk and criticality of your systems and assets as it relates to your mission and values of your organization, you cannot have a successful asset management program, and you will never get to where you're going to go because you will spend the money on the wrong stuff. It's quite simple as that. So answer one, I think we have a long way to go. The big gap is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit.
But I guess it's a matter of KPIs. Let's be specific again. Your average deployment to your average customer in the average use case.
Yeah.
If you do a before-after, like before they start with what I would guess is a proper approach, and after, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, whatever you say is the time where it hits and it's the aha moment where they see the difference. Are we talking 10% better, 30% better, night and day?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer directly. And I'll tell you why. Every customer is different. And some customers want to deploy over 16 months, and some customers are willing to let us push it. And I think our record is 29 days for deployment for the whole application. One of the differentiators of us is that all the RCM, call it the asset failure modes, and all the things you should inspect about an asset based on its failure modes, that's all out of the box with us. So the day they turn the software on, technically speaking, their return on investment begins right then and there. The challenge every customer faces is, one, we're doing things a different way, so now I'm no longer the expert. So sometimes there's resistance. Two, the data that they've had previously isn't great. It's dirty data. It's not very clear. We don't know whether it was this asset or that one. It's been misapplied to the wrong stuff. And it was insufficient data as well. Like, we give the ability to go drill down to the component levels, like real, hey, what's going on with your grease? And sometimes, it's just too diffuse. So it does take time to build up results. Our estimation from our own personal experience, when we did what the software enables you to do, I would say it was about a 2-year turnaround. I mean, obviously, immediately you do certain things, you begin to focus resources on what's important and what's not important, you let it go, and you started having better outcomes right away. But I would say that within a year to 2 years, you should see a 20% reduction in your spend. Now, that's ignoring the backlog. Everybody's got a backlog, and you've got to get through the backlog, right? So sometimes that can take 2 years. But once you get past that and you take this proactive posture, then the real return happens. But it'll never happen unless you organize your thoughts and prioritize properly.
Let me take you back through the roots.
Yeah.
Basically, 12 years ago, when you spin out of Veolia and you create Uberlytics. You've been through US Filter, Veolia, so you have an experience of that, let's say, corporate world. What takes you to do that leap of faith?
I went in and out of Veolia a few times. The nature of the market, I always look at it as like, never burn any bridges if you can help it, right? So for the most part, I was always welcome back. And I went off and I started an engineering operations consulting company at one point in the early aughts. That's how I got into asset management. I went back to some of my friends at Veolia and they said, hey, we're going to need help with this. You should learn about asset management. And I said, okay, cool. Teach me about it. And there was an extremely bright guy there called Terry Nelson. He was director of asset management for the West and savant level, kind of guy. And we wanted to do RCM. And the president of the region, very wise guy too, named Chibi Alloway, said, it's too expensive. We can't do this on everything. We got to come a way of figuring this stuff out. So Terry came up with a way, and he eventually spun out with full permission and everything from Veolia, Uberlytics. And then in 2012, by this time, I had, come in and out for a while, and I had been running the industrial business for them in the West. And Terry said, hey, what are you doing? And he goes, well, why don't you take a look at the software? Maybe you want to take Uberlytics over. Terry was a genius, but he didn't know how to run a company. So what I did is I took it, and I didn't know what I was talking about. I just went to SRP, and I went to General Dynamics. I had friends who worked there, and I said, hey, can you guys give me a couple of minutes and let me show you what this does and give me your feedback? And the only thing I was looking for was like, you got rocks in your head. This thing is stupid. And I didn't get that. I got, this is really interesting. And this is an alternative approach to Monte Carlo simulations and a number of other things. So I thought, okay, since I don't know what I'm talking about in this area just yet, and I didn't get these big negatives, this looks like a pretty good idea. So we turned it around kind of nicely. We did some nice presentations, and within a short couple of months, we landed LA County Sanitation District, which I have to admit, when I got the phone call afterwards, my hands were shaking. I called my wife up and said, you will not believe what just happened. And that just kind of started us off. And we went to some conferences, and we just ended up having some very great customers, people who understood the advantages of what we were doing. Anyhow, in the meantime, I had a customer who said, well, look, we want to buy some software, and I need your help picking what software we want to use to run our utility. And I said, okay, cool. How do you want to approach your assets? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you're doing it a certain way now. Do you want to stay there? And they go, like, no, not really. I says, okay, well, then let's go through the different ways in which you can address managing assets. And we can even talk about asset management as a comprehensive thing. So we put everything up on the table from A to Z, from the simplest to the most sophisticated. I said, well, what do you guys want to do now? And they go, well, we want to do that. And they pointed to a spot on the board. And I said, well, that's great, but there's no software on the market you guys can afford or that even exists that's going to do that for you. So we're going to have to cobble something together. And then in that discussion, I said, well, John Close, my business partner, he and I had tried to get together to do a number of things. And we got together in 2016 and said, look, you've got some intellectual property. I've got IP, and you guys have mobile platform. And I think we could really build something really cool together, something that doesn't exist in the market. Because when I was running the business in the West for Veolia, we had to use whatever we were given, whether it was IBM or Oracle or whatever it was. And we had to create so many bespoke little pieces of software here and there, including what was eventually became Uberlytics. So I looked at it and I said, why don't we just build something that is end to end? I went back to the customer and I said, look, will you give us some time? We can build something for you. And they said, sure, that's a great idea. And that was the beginning in 2017 of MentorAPM.
So that means that Uberlytics is somewhat a piece of the puzzle, which now builds MentorAPM. And that also means that MentorAPM is what you could afford custom built on-premise if you're a super large utility, but now with the vision that if you can standardize the bits and pieces, now you can make it accessible for a wider customer base.
So you said something in there that I would say is a highly, highly qualified yes. So to build on-premise, if you're a utility yourself, it requires a couple of things. One, it requires domain expertise. It also requires a lot of experience in a little bit of a broader. And since you've run facilities yourself, you understand that it isn't just like, hey, I know about pumps. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you need to know about. You need freedom, and you need an extremely quick team to be able to iterate and develop. And the other thing that we have on our backside now too is it's been 8 years. So sure, in about a year, you can come up with something. And we do come across a lot of homegrown stuff. They're heroic efforts. And some of the things that they do are really good. But you're looking at one or two guys and constrained by their day job and that kind of stuff. But you're absolutely right. Uberlytics is one of the foundations of the philosophy that was built into MentorAPM, which is you've got to understand your risk and criticality of your assets and really understand what's going on with them if you're going to make decent decisions about them. Having a CMMS and being able to do work orders, well, those are table stakes. Having a library in there that says, well, this is how your assets fail, and therefore this is what you should inspect about them, and you don't have to spend months and months and months creating that. It's out of the box. And by the way, it was proved at hundreds of facilities across the country. The proof of the eating is in the pudding. Let's go. John had some savants as well, some unicorns on his team. We had some good ones as well. So we pulled the resources together and we built out what I think is an excellent team.
Have you ever heard of a membrane that refuses to break? It sounds uncommon, but it's true. Meet Bluefoot Membranes, a Belgian company that has developed the first and only unbreakable membrane specifically designed for MBR. If you're new here, membrane bioreactor applications. This technology is setting a new standard in wastewater treatment. Water engineers and industry experts have tested this membrane, and no matter how much they pull and twist, the membrane holds strong. Now, it's not just about membranes, it's also about an award-winning and passionate team that doesn't take impossible as an answer. The people at Bluefoot Membranes are driven by a mission to make wastewater reuse the new standard, united by a shared purpose to leave a blue footprint on the world. So yes, they manufacture cool membranes, but they also push the boundaries of what's possible in MBR technology. To learn more about them, check the link to their website in the description. A big thanks to Bluefoot Membranes for sponsoring this episode, and back to me. You mentioned the car analogy earlier in that conversation. In the car, you have the screen on which you can touch stuff and interact with it. Yeah. From a software perspective, the screen runs on an OS, maybe it's Apple CarPlay or whatever it is. It's not key to the car working, but me as a user, that's what I work with. On the other hand, the engine has a very huge software inside, and that software regulates everything about the car. But I never touched that one because I'm not a car mechanic, so I never interact with that one. Where would you place MentorAPM between those two extremes? Like, are you a surface level interface where I can dig in and then it's going to connect to the right stuff in the back, but it's not the backbone? Or is it the invisible backbone with an emerged part of the iceberg, which is connecting to something else?
I'm a bit of a motorhead, so I'm really glad you asked that question. So it's a mix of the two. And the reason why I say that is that, if you pull an old car up, it's got nothing in there, no computer stuff, everything's analog. As the cars have become more complicated, it's like having a whole bunch of IoT sensors on your treatment plant, right? You get all this great data, so what are you going to do with it? Well, we still get these stupid codes. Oh, it's a P5 code and, whatever else it is. So what we are the ones that make sense of all that sort of stuff. So we want to consume all that information because we understand how that engine is supposed to function. And then we make it intelligible as if you're looking at an Apple screen on your computer or on your car dashboard. It says, hey, by the way, this and this is going on, and this is what it means. And you really should deal with this thing pretty soon because, you know what? This will probably fail in 3 weeks. And by the way, we do forecast like that. So we are that intersection between the invisible computer, we make sense of that stuff, and we feed it to the customer so they can actually go and do things in a timely fashion.
But how do you keep it accessible for customers? What I mean by that is, in the 90s, a hotel had a website. It was a unique feature, and then you would go on the hotel's website and then take your room. And then they did like the Hilton website with all the Hiltons inside. And then Booking came along and said, yeah, you know what? I can take Hilton, but I can also take Wyndham, and I can also take all of those. And then Trivago came along and said, yeah, I can take Booking, but I can also take hotels.com and so on. It always goes layer by layer by layer by layer. And users always tend to live in the upper layer, but if layers keep adding, at some point, you can have legacy systems and 10 different systems, and that one does this, and that one does that. And in the end, you're lost because data is scattered.
Yep.
So do you want to be the be-all, and then people only interact with MentorAPM? Or are you conscious that there's going to be different inputs and that you have to live without other inputs?
So one, I would say user interfaces and user experience is always really important. But if we are going to serve the whole needs of a utility or an industrial complex, then we have to have capabilities that are beyond just, here's a CMMS, we organize your work. So we have these modules that are subject or task specific. Asset investment planning, for instance, or risk analysis, or load leveling, taking all your workforce and prioritizing all their tasks and making sure that they're not overburdened and that kind of stuff. But they're all pulling from very similar, if not the same information. So if you think there's this repository of everything that Mentor can consume, and there's a layer of complexity that the user never needs to see, because the more things you make a software do, the more complex it gets behind the scenes. Our challenge is always like, how do we keep the user interface simple, intuitive? How do we make navigation easy? And we're not perfect. We're always taking customer input and feedback. In fact, I would say about 50% of what you see with us is based on customers saying, hey, can you do this instead? The other part, though, is that, in terms of wanting the be-all, is that, yes, we do want to be the be-all. In other words, from horizontal GIS-centric assets all the way through the vertical ones, from simple work orders to asset performance management and all the way through capital planning and risk analysis and all that. And the reason is that when you have disparate software that you're trying to bolt together, Now you've got data that's sitting in different parts. It's in different formats. Sometimes they talk to each other and sometimes they don't. Hopefully their APIs are published like ours are, because data transfer is important. But something we find out is that when you actually look for certain bits of information from your assets, we found that a lot of software out there doesn't even have a hole to park that information in. We are happy to supplement an SAP or an IBM because there's this installed emotional capital that you're never going to get rid of those. You're never going to unseat them because it just never happens. And so we say, but the user has difficulty or is not getting what they want. So we happily modularize and say, here, you can use this, you can use that. But when it's cohesive, the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That is one of the advantages of working with us. But complexity and capability, we're looking for this inverse relationship a little bit. Just this latest thing that we launched, and I think you saw it a little bit at WEFTEC, an early version of that, is MentorLens. It's AI powered, parts of it are. And it really is, a part of the task was like, look, everybody's got to go out and get information about their assets. Everybody has to go out and get plate data. They got to get condition data. And the more time they spend out in the field doing that, well, one, they're out in the elements. Two, they're in a more dangerous environment. And it's a non-routine task. And it takes time. And now you're sitting there out there with a device or whatever it is, and now you've got data parked off someplace else again. So what we said is like, look, we're already grabbing this stuff anyways with our mobile capability. Let's make this about as fast and as easy as, let's take a bunch of photos and see what we can do with that. So that's what we did. So now we have one of the most complex architecturally things that we've built, and yet it's actually the easiest thing to use that we have in the entire arsenal. Because you just literally just go out and take photos of stuff and it'll get plate data, it'll get condition data, and it's standardized, normalized, it's calibrated against the libraries. And the cool part too is I was in a field and I was doing a thermography. I was out with a consultant showing them this sort of stuff. And I was 40 feet away from a set of pumps. In fact, I stayed on one level and the pumps were in the basement. Took some pictures. Validated later on that the temperatures are right. But the coolest part was I didn't even have to get close to the stuff. So I was able to get condition information from 40 feet away. I didn't have to climb over anything. I didn't have to put myself in harm's way. But the point is what we were doing is enabling the customers to do way more, way faster with the increased use of technology. Makes it more complex for us, but actually it's easier to use.
You're mentioning a simple interface and you're mentioning AI. Those are two hands I have to take. So interface one is the picture, super easy. And AI and machine learning makes you recognize everything and then do the assessments. Yeah. Where I would be seeing the counterpart to that is if I need to interact with my system, I don't want to interact with my system by going into all the details and knowing where to click and stuff like that. I want to use simple chat, simple human language, and then having an agentic AI doing the stuff in the background.
Sure.
How far are we from that future?
Well, if you believe Microsoft, and I think they've got a pretty good understanding about these things, their assessment is about 2 years away from AI becoming the operating system. And our own internal view of these things is that might be a little bit optimistic. It is incredible what you can do today. And it's incredible what you could do today versus even 6 months ago. And there is a curve. It's an accelerating curve of what's possible. But I don't know if 2 years is really where it's going to be. It's lovely to be able to talk at things, but we still need to visualize and see data. And I find the visualization, unless it's a bespoke AI application, I find the visualization of the generative models sometimes lacking, particularly in the field that we're in. So you're looking at either somebody who's created a particular model themselves, or they've packaged it within the confines of something that already has the abilities to render information, et cetera. So as far as where I think it's going, I do think we're heading in that direction. But with most things, I think what we think 2 years in the past, when we get to that spot in the future, it doesn't look quite that way. But I think we're definitely heading that way. In fact, I remember when AI first started becoming sort of a talking point, we were resistant to it. We said, you know what? We do everything by physics and first principles already. I'm not sure why we need it because, to be quite honest, at the time, the competition in the AI models realm was like, AspenTech with MTEL. And the very, very competent machine learning algorithms that they had created. I remember looking at them and going like, holy cow, this is just amazing stuff. But even at that point, you needed to wait 14 to 24 months before you got data and results that you could really trust, because it had to babysit all the information coming in. It had to learn from those things. Now, you've got a different set of models that are coming out doing things. And I think some of them are actually misapplied. And I think they provide different opportunities for us. Because if you look at the large language models, they're not very good at making predictions. They're really good at describing stuff and creating documents. So just throwing a chatbot on, for instance, and having someone, talk to you about what's going on with your assets can be nice if they're trained or if they're sensitive to how an asset's actually supposed to perform. But as far as making a prediction, I am still really cautious about that. So when I said that we were very cautious a couple of years ago, eventually AI got to the point where we thought, okay, now we need to start investigating this thing in earnest. And we probably need to be one of the firms that is dealing with it, because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. And if you look at the legacy software firms, they have lots and lots of resources. One of the constraints is, and I've worked for very big companies before, is that decisions don't get made quickly and things don't, generally speaking, move quickly. So how do they do things? They go and buy technology and try to integrate it. And the emphasis is on the word try. But we realize that, those competitors, those software companies are going to have an advantage because they're a known commodity and they're probably going to go do something. So we need to do it as well. Our advantage is that we can iterate at an incredible breakneck speed. And we can do things, and we can, look at someone and go, well, this was a wrong decision. Let's not do that again. And let's pivot and do something different. And we did that in a couple of ways with every product that we've released. But I think with Lens, we made some very smart decisions at the beginning. We focused on customer productivity. So what do the large language models do? What are they really good at? What are the best ones out there? How do we leverage them properly? It's kind of like define the problem, figure out a solution to that, and then have a good go-to-market strategy on that, right? So we looked at this, we already had a product, we already had a customer base, and we knew there was a problem because I've experienced the problem, as do the customers. And so we knew that we could leverage what we already had and just empower it. And to be honest, when we look at the results, it's anywhere from like 10 to over 100x productivity improvement for the customer. So circling all the way back to one of the original questions, I think it's really important for customers to understand what promises are being made, what software or what AI is being used in the offering, and does it make sense? Because there are claims being made. I really don't like this because it ends up being bad for the industry in general. People are making claims like, oh, we can predict when your assets are going to fail. Well, based on what? You can't do that out of the box unless you've trained the models on that customer's assets for a good amount of time. And so, using general asset, like at Veolia, we would never use general asset failure data from around the country to model a specific plant. Is that plant in a cold environment, a hot environment? Does the team know how to maintain assets or not? So you look at all that sort of stuff and go like, if you just take a bunch of data in, you're just going to get this poisonous output, and maybe 55% of the time you're going to be accurate, but that's not good enough.
But you're at a very interesting position because I don't know if you've ever heard of Gong. Gong is a sales software which you use to record your sales teams. And then based on what they say and the output of the sales calls, you can give them hints and tell them how to become better. Bear with me, there's going to be a link. Gong became the best source for sales training because thanks to big data and thanks to the thousands of calls which they've recorded, they were able to identify patterns. And where I'm fully with you that every plant is different, and when I'm fully with you that sometimes it's going to be hot, sometimes it's going to be cold, sometimes it's going to be maintained well, sometimes it's going to be maintained wrong, you have all that data because you have all the sensors. You know also if it's hot and if it's cold, that's logged. You know if they do their asset management right or wrong because you're giving them mentoring and you can see if they follow it or if they don't follow it. You might not be allowed to crunch all the data and to use a big data lake with all your customers. But granted you are allowed, you would have all the qualifiers, which would put you in a good position to have the possibility to use that big data crunching to be as close as possible as to an out-of-the-box predictive maintenance type of solution. So is it utopic to think that you would have the elements and would you be allowed to use them?
I think I know where you're going on this one. And I would say yes, with a sufficient amount of customer data, we could do that. When we get to the point where we feel that the output would be better than what we currently provide, we would give the customer a chance to say, well, here's an AI that'll do this for you, or you can stick with these libraries of physics-based and experience-based stuff for you that's tailored to your experience. There still is a bit of a trust issue, even if they know AI might be better than them, in the sense that, hey, it's unbelievably fast and it's going to give me an accurate, input because it can assimilate more data than we can in a short amount of time. There's still this thing about like, well, I don't think I want to trust it because I don't want to be out of a job, or I don't feel comfortable with that. So recognizing, the customer's engagement with us, our philosophy is always customer gets the last look. When we get to that position, we would be looking at saying, Mr. Customer, which way would you like to go on that?
I don't believe AI is going to be the OS. So I'm even further down the line than what you were saying.
Okay.
Because I see AI as the mouse, not the OS.
Mm.
And it's a much better mouse than if I have to click left and right, because if I know your software, I know it. If I change job in 3 years, I need to learn a new software. Whereas AI will know it by function. But the engine is very probably better rooted in actual hard facts than in a system that can hallucinate. And that is why I personally have a crush for RAGs, because RAGs, they are built upon hard facts, and then AI is only a way to go and extract data and bring it back in a simple language type of interaction.
We're still sort of in the early days of the Wild West. Again, part of the challenges is these wild claims that are made at times and people's comfort level with stuff. And you're right, hallucinations are a challenge. One of the ways in which we got around that is that we will not only consume stuff in, but we calibrate or we tether. We're trying to come up with a meaningful way of describing. We tether, we put a leash on AI. Everything is tethered back to the definitions and the libraries that we have inside Mentor. So it's not allowed a free rein run. And we have ways of avoiding the hallucinations. I think the vision that Microsoft Nadella was talking about is the idea of, if you've created a bespoke piece of AI software that says, I've been trained to look at maintenance and asset management and whatever else, all you have to do is talk to me and I've got these sensors going and that sort of stuff. And great. And maybe it can do its job. But the challenge is with what I just said, you have to have enough sensors and information. So you still need people to go out and get the stuff. You still need people to go out and get the right stuff at the right frequency so they don't miss a failure that's starting and then they get caught with too late. And a lot of them can't afford all the sensors and stuff like this. We built Lens. Actually, when you look at the market situation right now, in the typical market, you're looking at about 1,000 utilities that are in about the 5 to 10,000 MGD, all the way up to the DC waters of the world. So you got about 1,000 and everyone's going for those. And then you look at the smaller ones and you're like, most of them have got Excel, if that, they got nothing. So we looked and say, look, you have to understand what your asset portfolio is. You have to understand what your condition of those assets are, or you'll never get any money from the government for the state revolving funds to go and deal with your infrastructure kind of thing, right? So one of the reasons why we built Lens was it's like, go out, it'll build a register for you on the fly. Just take pictures of stuff. It'll build everything for you and you can basically have this as part of your asset management program. And you don't need sensors because you just go and take pictures of stuff and you throw a $200 FLIR camera on the back of your phone and you got a beautiful thermograph, and next thing you know, you've got surrogate information about what's going on inside your assets. The point is that for the AIs to have this, call it Terminator, whatever, all-knowing sort of overlord kind of things over us, it's going to require facilities of a particular nature with a certain amount of technology applied and a crew of some experience to be able to go out and get certain kinds of information. Now, they can do that with our software as well, but you're not going to be able to do the AI stuff unless you've got a very connected plant. You
mentioned the libraries and you mentioned the difficulty for a mid-sized utility to have much more than an Excel. In the case that they start deploying MentorAPM out of the box, how much of the assets do you recognize? Like, is it like 10% is within the libraries, or your libraries are built in such a fashion that it's really a bespoke approach to add some little stuff left and right, but most of it is going to be built on solid foundations? It's
basically 100%. So, we took what we did over decades of experience, and what's inside Mentor in the libraries is virtually any kind of asset that you would find at a municipal facility and about 95% of what you find in industrial. The customer always has a particular preference about calling something a certain thing. Well, this is an autoclave and I want to call it an autoclave and I want the autoclave kind of asset type in there. Sure, we can create that. It takes a couple of minutes. That's all. But we know that assets can be grouped. They all behave the same way. Whether you have a concrete tank or a metal tank, they'll both leak. They leak for slightly different reasons based on the materials of construction, but most of the failure modes are the same. And so we have basically 100% of everything that they would find. Now, you can hire a consultant if you want to go and do it. In fact, here's what always ends up happening. And LA County was the same way. We've got close to 400 asset types that we'll cover pretty well. The most utility operators, LA County being a prime example, they'll settle on 100. They don't need to have all 13 kinds of pumps or the 59 types of valves that we've got. This is a butterfly valve, and this is a globe valve, and that's a centrifugal pump, and I'm good. So yes, it's right out of the box.
And how abusive would it be to call that a digital twin?
Having an asset name or description isn't a digital twin. But what we do is we say, here's
But if you know the failure modes and you know what's going to happen over time, it sounds to me very much like a digital twin.
Yeah, I would say we've got the digital twin of how your asset's going to fail and the time horizon at which the components actually fail and how significant those components are. They're all built in already. So yeah, I would say you're looking at digital twin of your facility. Now, how it's interconnected, that's not done out of the box because everybody's plant is different.
Interesting. You mentioned the consultants. Let's talk about your go-to-market, because consultants could be either your competitors, you're taking their job, you're taking your former job, or they might be your best go-to-market because that's a way for them to go faster and to do more.
So the go-to-market strategy is based on direct to consumer, direct to the utilities or the industry, as well as the consultants. There is a little bit of that rub that we've experienced. We said, look, we built these tools that are going to make your job a whole lot faster and your customer is going to be happier. And sometimes there has been some resistance. And in fact, whether it was the risk analysis approach, because somebody else has a different approach and they love to charge, $400,000 or $500,000 for something that we can basically be done, including the price of software, for 80. And they're done afterwards within a few short weeks. And same thing with Lens. With condition assessment, consultants have enjoyed, and they still will enjoy, the ability to go onto a site and be the resources for the utilities. Every utility is still staff constrained, so the consultants are never going to go away. But I think what's happening is when we first piloted it, there were some former Jacobs folks that were part of our partnership team in Australia, and they basically said, look, this is going to upset the apple cart a little bit because you're not going to be able to send as many people out for as long because you actually don't have to, right? You can send a very inexpensive staff person out and they just take a whole bunch of pictures. And then the real value add is when something comes back and saying, well, this is actually pretty janky. It's like a 4 or a 5. We should actually put some real eyes on this thing. That's when you get some real value added from the higher cost consulting individuals within the firm. Initially, there was a bit of resistance, and then they all started looking at it going like, wow, this is going to help us along. It's going to make the customer a lot happier. We're going to be a lot faster. And to be honest, we have to get with the program because eventually things do get commoditized and nobody can expect to stay, it's just going to be this way for the next 50 years. If you do that, you're probably going to be out of business in 20. So same thing with software. We have to do the same thing. We constantly have to look at what is the latest, greatest thing that's coming out, where the customers want to go, and we have to iterate. We got to get with the program. And I think so do the consultants as well. And I think when they began to realize that their customers, our customers, the same customer, is still resource constrained. They still have to send people out there. They just get to do it a whole lot faster now.
But when you mention that you go direct to customer, that means that in that case, you are doing the connections yourself, or do the customer have the ability to do it themselves?
They absolutely have the ability to do it themselves. And we tell them so. Every place that we've talked to, we say, look, form a relationship with a local college, form a relationship with summer students and that sort of thing. Get a bunch of interns. This software is so simple to use. In fact, when we first were showing the early versions of this thing to our customers, I kid you not, every one of the CEOs or directors of the utilities and that sort of stuff, they came back with the same idea. They just used different words. They said, I can send an admin out. I can send a high school student out. I can send an intern out. That kind of idea. And they realized, wow, you're empowering us to have data every day, and it's not going to cost me a lot of money. But it still means they have to have a relationship with somebody. In fact, we were just at Santa Monica the other day, and that was our suggestion is like, add an additional intern. We'll train them. You'll be done in 2 weeks. But sometimes customers want to use consultants, so they can go and do that themselves. We price things identically, so we're not doing a weird game about that sort of stuff. And as much as we say, hey, Mr. Customer, you should take it on, we find that the engineering consulting companies are very receptive.
What triggers those direct customers, because it's maybe easier to measure, what triggers them to reach out to you or you reach out to them? Is it like they have a crisis and need to solve it and that's the right point in time to get to a clever way? Or is it really, budgets being cut, though they need to be clever?
You just described something that I wish was reality, this tidal wave of customers reaching out to us to say, hey, we need your stuff. There isn't a software company on the planet, I don't think, that isn't interested in having that happen. It's usually the reverse. It's like, hey, we're trying to get the message out. Do you realize you can do so much more with what you've got? And I think we're trying to cut through the noise as well. Everybody is so busy. They don't either have the time or the emotional and physical capacity to think about a new way of doing something to be able to get more done. They just need to get through this year kind of thing. So I think we have that challenge. When we talk about the difference between our normal EAM, and that discussion is usually related to asset management and budgets and capital planning and that sort of stuff. When we talk Lens to people, all of a sudden there's a completely different conversation. They're like, wow, wait a minute. You mean I can get this information every day of the week? I can do this at will. I can send out inexpensive people, I can have this as part of their normal. The volume of data they can come back with and the low cost to that, or that it's applicable to their asset investment program trying to get money from the state revolving funds. It hits on a very different set of pain points. In fact, that was one of the things. Remember, I said there was about 1,000 customers across the US that everybody's vying for. When we look at Lens, all of a sudden, and we said, look, we have to build something that is applicable to the half MGD people. The addressable market is much, much bigger. It is a ubiquitous problem that they've got. Like, they don't understand what assets they've got, not sufficiently well. And they sometimes have wrong plate data, and they certainly don't know what's going on with them all the time. Now, some of them are obviously better than others. So it is highly applicable as well to the resource constraint.
So that means that Lens is a very strong hook to get people interested. I asked a variation of that question when we met at WebTech. I would see that as the perfect lead magnet, actually, in a freemium approach. You get Lens, you walk around your plant, you collect data, and it says, oh, I identified 27 assets. Do you just want to live with the information that identified 27 assets, or would you like to see those assets on the platform, in which case, subscribe to MentorAPM?
That's actually one of the approaches that we've looked at. We've actually had a free version out there for a while. Customers can go ahead and try that. And it's the challenge with the municipal sector is it's a race to be second. People are very conservative. There's still this distrust. They clearly see there's a value proposition here that works. The software works. The approach is really simple, and they get information that they've never had before. But there's a budget cycle. They're reluctant to be the first out of the block. That's why I'm saying it's a race to be the second, right? So we have to be creative in how we get folks to be able to sign on for it. And that's one of the reasons why we actually will go out and say, we'll do this for you guys. We'll actually go and, if your resources are a problem, we'll go and do this. We'll spend an afternoon. All my sales guys go out and spend a day with the customers, give them the data for free, let them experience it and see, hey, this is valuable. Yeah, there is a freemium approach to this thing. And then there's also, when we do the ROI calculations, the more people they give it to, the bigger the ROI, because you're not relying on one or two people traveling around anymore. It's now like it is out there, and we don't charge for users.
I was going to say that stands out in your marketing, like something which is super important. So I guess it is, which is that if I take an SAP license, it has a cost. Whereas you say, no, you take it and then you run with as many people as you want. So is there a trade-off for you in terms of cost? Because I guess for you, it's a cost, having more people working with the tool.
There's a fundamental reason why we did that. When both John and I were working at our former employers, John actually used to work for Oracle, and me, Veolia / US Filter, and some others along the way. One of the biggest points of frustration is that the people who needed the software didn't get access to it, or it was an insufficient number of people. And then, somebody's walking around going like, well, we have to pay for that, so you can't have it. And then all of a sudden, the whole reason why you have it has been short-circuited. And people who don't really need it are the ones who get access to it. It's like, well, why does that guy have it? So we looked at all the pain points for owning software, and we said, let's get rid of that. So we don't charge for the number of users, no concurrent seats, none of that sort of stuff. If you want to put the mayor's mother onto the software because, for whatever reason, go for it. In fact, we always say too, put your contractors on the software, no charge, because they're actually part of your team. They're an extension of your organization. The point is you want to get value out of the investment. And that was really one of our intentions is like, if you're going to spend money with us, we want to make really sure you're getting the most out of the software you can get out. And one of the ways to do that is like, we don't restrict you. So we have what we believe is a very, very simple, unique pricing model. And it's really basically just based on what's your rated capacity of your facility. If your rated capacity is 10 MGD or 50 MGD, you will pay a different amount because you've got a different number of assets, you've got this and different that sort of stuff. But the users, that's an easy pain point for us to say, doesn't matter. Because to be honest, memory is getting really cheap. I mean, we're deployed on Amazon and Azure on a number of failovers. We have zero downtime. And that is a cost that doesn't increase proportional to the number of users you have, a little bit to the proportion of number of customers you've got, but it's not breaking the bank. So why not give them value?
And does that mean that contractors in turn become your reps? Because if they appreciate working with it on a certain customer, then they might also be working with the neighbor utility. And then they can go to the neighbor utility and say, you know what, your neighbor is using that. And then name and shame. Are you really retarded or do you want to use it as well?
Yeah, the notion of word of mouth is pretty important. And you're absolutely right. We didn't look at it so much from word of mouth perspective. We just looked at it as like, I was a utility operator. I wish I had access and my team had access to software unrestricted. And that's really why we did it. But I like that approach. Maybe we'll have to sort of modify our marketing a little bit.
Don't say it comes from me that you have to call people retarded because, but That means that, is it like a license you get once, or is it a software as a service?
It's software as a service. So it's, we basically say, what's your rated capacity? Here's your price per year. You get these things out of the software. And we do say, if you don't want everything, that's okay. You get the basic version, CMMS and that sort of stuff, or you can have the part with risk and asset investment planning. Doesn't matter to us whether you're GIS, like horizontal assets or vertical, everything works. In fact, you get mobile out of it as well, because we actually did a replatforming recently. Now, when you hit the mobile environment, you're actually hitting the main application on your phone, though. Just like when you go to the banks, you're actually hitting their main application. It's just replatformed for your mobile device. So it's separate than, here's a typical mobile. Like, for instance, you can't take Angry Birds and throw it onto your Chrome device or onto your Chrome browser, that sort of thing. So we did that because it took Apple and Google a little bit out of the roadblocks for us, because every time we wanted to make a change in the main app, we had to make a change in the mobile app, and then you got to wait for the code to be approved and blah, blah, blah. And 4 weeks can go by. Well, I don't like that. If I make a code change in the main app, I want my users to have that code change tomorrow, and mobile and the main application have to be the same thing. So yeah, it's one price. That's what you pay every year. All the upgrades are included. If we want to provide a Lexus at a Chevy price, that's pretty well sort of a little catchphrase that we use internally. So we provide way more than our competition does, and we don't charge more.
The first building block for MentorAPM had Uber in the title. So
Yes.
I need to ask you if that's at some point part of the vision to have like that Uber approach of saying, we will burn money for 10, 15, 20 years. But once we are the option, we are going to be so profitable that, too big to fail, inevitable, and all the synonym you can find to that. So what is your take on that growth path?
I think we had Uber before Uber was around. And when we look at the original...
You should sue them.
So this is actually a true story. So we were at a conference one time in California, and somebody came by our booth and said, so Uberlytics, so do you guys analyze the Uber use in our town? And the conflation of the two terms, except that Uber actually, from a German perspective, means from over top. And so analyzing things from a bird's eye view, that's really what it meant. And try as Jenny might, years ago, she said, I hate the word. We got to get rid of it. We got to call the company something else. We spent 6 hours in a car driving to California, and she's very good at marketing. And at the end of the 6 hours, she goes, as much as I hate to admit it, I cannot come up with a different name that fits better. Focus is on growth at this point. So the investment that we took from Emerald, and they've been a great partner that way. They've been very supportive. And basically, we look at it as like, let's grow as quickly as we can. But that came from a European mindset as well. You can only burn money so long before you really need to make profit. It's a bit of a mix of both. I would like to start accelerating and being a little bit more in the black than we are right now. But like I said, right now it's on growth. I just feel a little bit less comfortable focusing on growth than profitability.
But exactly in your lane, if you have a VC pocket of money, I guess you would be doing it wrong if you're profitable.
Yes. And it's interesting, when you come from bootstrap, and bootstrap means there has to be enough green at the end of the year to cover all the costs, and you go to VC money, it's a fundamental shift in thinking. And we were also really fortunate to have Colby Manwaring join our board and extend the chairman board seat to him from Innovize fame, having sold it to Autodesk for $1 billion. And I think that was the first $1 billion software play like that. We had an interesting relationship over a number of years. In fact, I remember it was shortly after he had taken over Innovize, he came by a booth and introduced himself to us. And so we started up a friendship at that point. And that was back several years.
It looks like you're reading my notes.
No, actually, I'm not.
Right now, if you look at the sector you're in, and you were kind enough to send me some market studies which confirm that with hard facts, it is consolidating. Overall, in the horizontal of asset management, it is consolidating with more companies coming together. If I look at the water vertical, there are a limited amount of real plays coming out. I would probably name 3, with Siemens doing an outside-in job, Xylem doing an inside-out job, and then Autodesk / Innovize being the third one. I just noticed that my podcast alumni, Andrew Cody, just joined and took the lead of their strategy. So I guess former Veolia guy in good hands, plus you have good ties to people who have been doing successful business between Innovize, Autodesk. Is all of that a hint to where you're heading?
No, not necessarily. When we looked at our initial foray into taking money, it really was in order for us to be able to accelerate, because we knew that in order to remain viable, we had to grow faster. The big boys could apply resources. They could eventually overtake us. In fact, when we looked at just Uberlytics on its own, and it was one of the reasons why actually I got together with John and said, look, I got about 5 years before I think someone's going to copy us and I want to stay ahead of the curve, call it the underdog or the smaller player, whatever. You always have to somehow be better and faster and stay ahead of the curve and offer some more. We took that as a growth opportunity for us. Candidly speaking, yes, we look at the consolidation of the market. It's not only the big ones buying technologies in order to stay relevant. Some of them are spinning them out. We also see applications consolidating a little bit, trying to be more than what they were before. And that's one reason why we've built out everything that we've built out. So when we look at us from end to end, I'm like, we are a half step back from Copperleaf when it comes to what we can do in asset investment planning. And that was deliberately done so. And that was actually part of the advice that we got back from some of our advisors and some of the folks that we had sought advice from when we took a look at like, here's what we're building. How far should we go? When we look at all that sort of stuff, we say, okay, the next thing is we got to deal with AI. And I believe we can stay ahead of the curve as long as we continue to iterate. And we have very good people in-house on doing that sort of stuff. So I think our viability is very, very, very strong. I can't predict what the future is holding.
But you are at a strategic turn, because where you are right now, you could be taking a new round and then building up that new round and making it even bigger and even faster.
Where you're in the process of looking at saying, hey, how do we grow faster? And you're looking at the potentials for someone to make an investment. You have broad set of conversations. So this is one of the things why I've appreciated. This is something you don't realize until you actually take VC money. All of a sudden, there's a cadre of social capital that is all of a sudden open to you and people you come into contact with. So now I have a relationship with a number of the other firms that were not only are in the Emerald family portfolio, but that exited out as well, because there's a nice relationship going on there. So every once in a while, I will reach out and ask questions of certain folks and say, hey, this is what we're doing. How would you guys address this kind of thing? So it's nice to have that network.
If you go down the route of taking a new round and then watching where to build with that, and as you mentioned, the other companies in the ecosystem, one of your somewhat distant cousins would be Transcend. When Transcend did their latest round, what also came with that is a change in name, switching from Transcend to Transcend Infra and saying, water is the core, but if you zoom out, there's a bit more in their adjacencies. And similarly for you, even though I get that it's a clear, strong differentiator that you have built around water, still oil and gas using water processes, water treatment places is a chemical factory. And I mean, you could go to CPI, you could go to energy, you could go to laboring places.
A lot of the technology that we have built into Mentor was tried and proven in the crucibles of an industrial environment. ExxonMobil is probably the most exacting customer I ever served. And a lot of the stuff that actually we have in Mentor was tried there, first time ever, and then subsequent years later, and very, very, very successfully. So we have no qualms or inhibitions about pursuing the industrial market. It's a question of resources and about, building a war chest and that kind of stuff. Because every time you start going into a new region, you have to be able to fund that for a while because you're a newer player in the market. Maybe partnerships are the way to go. We do have somebody in our sales staff now who has a greater degree of exposure in that market than some of the rest of our sales force. And I think we're going to leverage that as well. I think the timing is just about right. But it's trying to figure out where they're going to be receptive. If you've got a really good idea and you bring a good value proposition to them, then I think our trick is just making sure that we find that. Some of the customers or potential customers don't like anything going over the wall. So the notion of using any kind of AI or being a SaaS solution is a bit of a challenge in that regard because they want things behind their wall, which means you've got to do an on-prem, so to speak, and now all of a sudden you make things more complex. If the deal is right, sure, you're able to support that.
I had warned you that I'm French and that I have abused your time, but still I want you to respect the rest of the day. I have the last question for you in the deep dive, which is a vision question. I don't know where you put the horizon, but when you look at the horizon, what are you building?
Our mission from the beginning has always been to be the CMMS, APM, whatever you call it, the EAM of preference, of choice, because the value proposition is just so compelling. And really to have this all-in-one tool set that's competent, if not the most competent, at least number 2 in that particular category. So whether it's risk analysis or investment planning. And right now, I believe if I stack this up against anybody else, I would say we're number 1 in almost every category. Our vision for the next couple of years is how do we maintain that? So we have to think about that. But I would say the integration of AI as responsibly as possible. The way we term it internally is responsible AI, because we don't want to be what some of our competitors are, making these false claims and these grandiose things. It just hurts the industry and it hurts your business. So I think there's plenty of room to improve on some of the stuff that currently we leave to physics first principles. I think you touched on some of it. The more data we have, the more opportunity there is to leverage AI and making the right type of assessments. I'm going to stay away from the word predictions because that requires a different type of AI model. We do forecasting already, and it's really good. But I would say to become the known best in the category, I think messaging is going to be very important. And someone has actually said that the general tenor is like, oh, these guys at Mentor, yeah, they really understand their stuff. They really know their stuff. They get it when it comes to asset management, managing assets, that sort of stuff. So I think that the next phase for us is to be able to have that tactily represented in a market share that is undisputed.
And so if I now reverse engineer that vision, what needs to happen in the next 12 months?
We're going to flesh out a few nagging little things that my perfectionist disposition wants to have simplified or more push button. Definitely improving on, and I think we're already so far ahead of the pack when it comes to what we're doing with AI in terms of customer productivity and what we can offer them. But looking at the next 12 months and saying, okay, what are we going to do next with this? What's the next problem for us to address that's meaningful for the customer? So that about covers it for the next 12 months. The other part is increase market share. Every board meeting is like, okay, how are you doing as far as market share?
The market projections you sent me were showing that the overall field of asset management is growing double digits, but now I have one other one, which is agentic AI, is growing on a compound annual growth rate according to projections of 40 to 50%, which is easy. You start from nothing 2 years ago. But that means there's a certain growth rate in the markets for clever enhancements.
Yeah, but it depends. I posted something on LinkedIn. It was like basically a bar of soap with a soap dispenser button pressed on top. And the idea of just throwing a chatbot into your existing software system is basically that. It's a lot harder than people realize. You can't just throw an AI against something. And yes, AI use is going to increase. The question is whether you're able to effectively put it into the software, that you're not just whitewashing or you sort of like AI washing whatever, and that you're making claims that aren't true, or the models really don't do what they're not capable of doing, that kind of stuff. I think people are going to have to be careful about what they do with it. I think there's going to be some companies that are going to do well because they understand and they're not fooling the customer and they're really looking after what the customer's needs really are. And I think those companies will do well, and I think they're going to see some good growth. I think at the end of the day, the unmet promises are going to result in some backlash. It might take a year or two, but I think it's going to result in some disenchantment and some swap out.
You mentioned several times in that conversation the element of customer needs and how that has simply driven your roadmap. You've taken the customer needs and you've transposed it into a software. If I refer to that pretty infamous Brookings study of the workforce in the water utilities, one of the key findings is that, yes, we can lament as much as we want about the budgets being cut and not meeting what would be needed. But at the end of the day, that's not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is the people. There are so many open positions, and it's not possible to fill those positions, and it's not getting any better with the silver tsunami.
Yes.
The way I see the use of AI is that you can create enhanced operators. And if really the wife of the mayor can go out and take pictures, then you got yourself a free worker working for the utility. So that is, I think, the most compelling part of your vision, to me at least, because it resonates with me. Being a part-time one-man band, I use AI to enhance myself. Not to replace myself. I don't want to replace myself.
But productivity is being improved. Right. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. And I totally agree with you on the notion of, and that's why we call it a force multiplier, because you get more done a lot faster. And the more people you give it to, it becomes just, exponentially more data and easier to do. The other part is, we talked about libraries before, and it's the way the software is set up internally. The silver tsunami is a real problem. And for doing analysis on how the systems have hurt us in the past, like a risk analysis kind of thing on that sort of stuff. And the silver tsunami, those people are really needed because they're the ones that have all this institutional knowledge that often is not existing anywhere inside any kind of database. But the idea of saying, once we set the software up, saying, when this goes from lead to lag, and what kind of stresses are we capturing on the assets and that sort of stuff, it's really designed to have like a really smart engineer looking over your shoulder, like best practices kind of stuff. Part of what we're trying to provide is for the supervisors and the managers to be able to say, I can go on vacation because I know the way the software is there, it's guiding the people. And yes, I can probably get by with having one less person, maybe because I'm not allowed to hire another person because I've got software tools that prioritize them properly. I've got force multipliers with Lens, that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, they move into a more proactive posture, less reactive. They can take vacation because they've got something that is running the way they want the facility to run. It's designed to emulate that. It's designed to facilitate that. They just have to set it up that way, and we help them do that. So when I look at AI, I just look at AI again right now as, well, will we do predictions? Maybe we will if we have enough data. But right now we're focusing on force multiplying, on staff efficiency and making the gains there because people are leaving. They got to do more with less. And it's fun to be able to, when I started playing around with AI, it's like, wow, this is great. I get so much done in a day because I'm asking a particular version of GPT to do something for me. Contract reviews, whatever it ends up being.
It's as if it were in your name somewhere, because we talked about APM. We didn't talk about mentor, but that's the philosophy you've built in, which is to mentor the people. Mentoring the people doesn't mean you do it for them, doesn't mean you replace them. It means you're giving them the right hints so that they take the right decisions, which is kind of an Aristoteles way or Socrates.
Yes.
One of the two. Way to look.
The Socratic method?
Socratic, probably.
Yeah. So when we started the company up, we knew the philosophy that we wanted to imbue. We wanted to provide industry best practices and all the learnings we had gotten through the years of running facilities. And we said there are great ways to do this. And so when we looked at the other company names, we said, why don't we call ourselves Mentor? Because the customer can start at a particular place. And as they're ready to go forward and become a little bit more advanced, the software is sitting there ready and waiting and providing guidance and suggestions. Part of it comes from training. Part of it comes from our Asset Management 101 courses that we offer. But one of the key things is, when you look at it, it's like where they should be ending up is when they're looking at investment plans. They really should be making risk-based investment plans, not because, I don't like the stainless steel, it's tarnished and we want to replace that over there. They need to be doing this in a way that is risk-based. Part of the mentoring is like explaining to them, by the way, when you have this risk analysis here, you click this button, and now all of a sudden you can create a capital plan and readjust what the risk is after the plan. So now you can rank order all these projects based on how much risk they reduce, how much they cost you, normalize all these results, what orders should they be in, and it does it all automatically for you.
I said 15 minutes ago that it was going to be my last question, so let me stick to my guns. Thanks, sir, for everything you shared in that deep dive. If that's fine with you, to round off the conversation for today, I have a set of rapid fire questions.
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
What is the toughest challenge in your opinion for a water tech startup?
The noise.
What would be your best single piece of advice for the founders and managers of the about 1,000 early stage water startups?
Clearly define a problem that you want to address and have a very clear go-to-market strategy on that and come up with a solution that actually addresses that.
What's the drop of knowledge you wish more investors knew about the water sector?
The sales cycle is longer than expected, and the customer is very risk averse. This is the part where I was saying before, race to be second.
And that is still the case.
Yeah. That's the advantage of the industrial market. They kind of understand sales cycles maybe 3 to 6 months, if that, and it's a numbers game.
What was your most unexpected partnership and what did it bring you?
I would say it was a relationship in Australia with Ung & Co. It was not only a great extra business, it exposed us actually to a sector of the market which validated our ease of use for very low bench strength.
I think you kind of answered that one, but still, super short, profitability or growth?
Growth.
What's the next profile you'll hire?
Sales.
What is your sales today? Your sales department?
Yeah, I would say we are probably looking for a sales executive, someone to lead the sales department. So It's hard to find really good salespeople.
And you're looking for someone from the sector and someone from software?
Prefer the sector knows how to sell software. It doesn't matter to me whether they've been in a startup before. You have to love the industry and you got to want to sell software.
Opening new markets or doubling down on the current ones?
It's a bit of both, but I would say still doubling down, but beginning to look at the other way.
What's that tool nobody speaks about, but you could not live without?
Coffee.
Good one. What's the single piece of insight your ideal customer profile needs to hear right now?
I would say that if you don't understand the risk and criticality properly of your asset portfolio, you're never going to get where you need to go. It's essential.
What are you desperately needing and want to raise an open call for right now?
People who want to sell software. Salespeople.
Okay, at least there's consistency.
Yeah.
And last one, what can and should I do for you?
Oh man, just help us get the word out. We love your podcast. You are second to none. Yeah, I think that's all we could ask or think or hope.
Appreciate it. Well, if people want to follow up with you after that conversation, where shall I redirect them?
Well, they can connect with me on LinkedIn, either Tacoma Zach or MentorAPM on LinkedIn, or just go directly to the website, mentorapm.com.
As always, the links to all of that will be in the description, so have a look down there. And Tacoma, it's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to see in 6 months or 12 months which one of my various predictions will come through.
Antoine, this has been absolutely delightful. And I think perhaps I was a bit more nervous than I should have been because you have an extraordinary roster of interviews. And like I said, I really mean it. Your interviews and podcasts really are second to none. So thank you very much. It's been a delight.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.